Hey guys, welcome back to another video of Frostiest Lane. This is the series what if S was Mew 2. So those who are new on this series, just check out this from the very beginning, and for the executive and exclusive new series you should subscribe my channel, and I'm sure you will like that, because if you are a fan of Pokemon or any specific big 3 anime, I'm sure you'll find my channel really interesting, because there are many upcoming videos on them. So guys, subscribe it and turn on the bell icon, because when you get the notification you will love the topic. So today we are going on to the Viridian Forest, as has his Pokemon team ready. He got a companion, Misty, obviously. So let's begin today's episode without any more delay.
AAAAAHHHHH. Ash, Joy, Eevee, and Pikachu quickly turned around to see what had caused their companion to scream, and Ash stumbled a bit when Misty ran and hid behind him. Misty, what's the matter? Misty pointed a shaking finger at the direction she came from to point at a green caterpillar Pokemon. Joy smiled at the sight of the cute Pokemon. Oh, it's a Caterpie. Ash reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out his Pokédex and pointed it to the Pokemon. Caterpie. Its short feet are tipped with suction pads that enable it to tirelessly climb slopes and walls. For protection, it releases a horrible stench from the antenna on its head to drive away enemies. Cool. Putting the device away, he grabbed one of the spare Pokeballs that he had attached to his belt and enlarged it. I'ma catch it. Joy immediately noticed what Ash was about to do and brought her hand up in order to stop him. Wait, Ash. Ash did not hear her and pulled his arm back in order to throw at Pokeball. Go. He threw the Pokeball, aiming to catch the Caterpie. However, instead of hitting the bug and catching it, the ball flew over it, with said bug Pokemon following the flying ball with a turn of its head. Everyone, sans Joy, face faulted at this, as they were not expecting this. Joy sighed exasperatedly as she walked up to Ash, who was frozen in his throwing pose. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Ash, did you practice your throw as I told you? Ash did not move an inch as he sweet dropped. Joy shook her head as she sighed again. Ash, I told you that if you want to become a trainer, you are supposed to practice your throwing accuracy so that you don't miss when you toss a Pokeball. Ash finally stood up straight before rubbing the back of his head and sheepishly chuckled at Joy. I did practice, just not as much as you said I should. Joy smiled at the boy's answer, as she already figured it would be like this. I also see that you forgot what you should do in order to actually catch a Pokemon. You need to weaken it before you try and catch it. Ash's shoulders dropped as he gained a depressing aura. Oh. Right. Misty couldn't help but laugh a bit at this. Looks like you really are just a rookie. Ash dropped his depressing aura and angrily looked at the girl. Hey, I only just started my journey. I'm still learning. Joy nodded as she moved over to where the thrown Pokeball was. He is right, Misty. She picked it up and moved over to hand it back to Ash. He is only just starting, so it only makes sense that he is going to make mistakes. She then looked to her right to see Eevee and Pikachu talking to the Caterpie. You can try again since the Caterpie hasn't left yet. Misty sighed as she remembered how she was when she started training. Well, everyone starts somewhere. Pikachu and Eevee were enjoying the conversation they were having with the bug Pokemon. Pikachu folded her arms as she asked, so you want to become a Butterfree to be able to fly up in the sky? Caterpie nodded as he began to do gesturing movements. Yeah. I always wanted to fly high in the sky and see the world from above. Eevee wagged her tail as she smiled. That sounds beautiful. I wonder what it would be like to see from up high. I hope that one day I can do the same. Caterpie nodded as he thought about flying. It was then that he saw the human with the red hat walk up to them. Once Ash was close to them, he knelt down and asked, Hey Caterpie. I wanted to ask you if you wanted to join me on my journey. Caterpie tilted his head as he looked at the other two Pokemon. Pikachu smiled as she nodded. You should come with us. Ash might help you fly sooner. Eevee nodded in agreement. He is a very nice person and he could help out. Caterpie thought about it for a second before looking back up at Ash. Okay. Ash smiled as he looked to Eevee. Do you wanna be the one to battle him? Eevee looked between Caterpie and Ash for a second before she nodded. Caterpie felt a bit nervous about battling since he hasn't really battled before, but he figured that if he wanted to get better he should start here. He positioned himself opposite of Eevee and hoped he at least didn't embarrass himself. Ash moved over to Eevee and whispered to her to make sure that Misty didn't hear him. "What moves do you know?" Eevee sat down and wagged her tail. "I know quick attack, growl, yawn, and double kick." Ash was surprised by Eevee knowing double kick, but he could not help but smile at this bit of info. "That's really cool." He immediately went wide-eyed as he covered his eyes and looked back to see Joy and Misty looking at him. The former with an amused look on her face and the latter with a look of confusion of his reaction. He nervously chuckled before he cleared his throat. "Okay, let's get this started." He moved to stand behind Eevee and looked to Caterpie. "You ready?" "Yeah." Ash nodded as the battle started. He pointed at the bug Pokemon. "Eevee, start this off with quick attack." Eevee charged at Caterpie with a white stream trailing behind her. Caterpie chose to meet the quick attack with tackle, but due to Eevee's quick attack having the speed advantage and her being a higher level, Caterpie was sent flying until he rolled on the ground with swirls in his eyes. Ash smiled at this before he grabbed an empty Pokeball, pulled his arm back, aimed, and threw it at Caterpie. The ball made contact before it absorbed the bug type and fell to the grass. He watched it shimmy 3 times before it pinged. He smiled widely before he picked the ball up and posed. "Alright. I caught a Caterpie." Pikachu and Eevee jumped into the air to join the posing. "Welcome to the team. We have a new friend." Misty and Joy both smiled at the sight of not only Ash doing this pause thing again, but that Pikachu and Eevee seemed to become a part of it. Misty was also relieved that the bug type was now in a Pokeball and away from her. She hated bug types. Sure, she could deal with them if she was in the middle of a battle, but if she had to deal with them up close she would freak out. She was brought out of her relief when she heard a Pokeball opening and saw the Caterpie was out of its ball. She shrieked and hid behind a tree. Ash looked confused about the shriek and saw that Misty was now hiding behind a tree some meters away. He looked to Joy and asked, "Can you help heal him?" Joy nodded as she knelt down and gave on-field medical help. Thankfully it wasn't injured too much, so it just needed some potion to be right as rain. She pulled one out and applied it to the bug type, who soon chirped in happiness. She petted the bug type with a smile. "You're quite welcome." Ash looked over to Misty to see her cowering behind a tree. "Hey Misty, come say hi to Caterpie." "I'm fine staying away from that bug." Ash tilted his head in confusion. "But why?" Joy patted his shoulder as she answered, "I believe that Misty has a fear of bug types." She then petted Caterpie, who began to shear from this. "I think it's best to keep Caterpie a distance from Misty for now." Caterpie became teary when he heard that the other pretty girl was afraid of him. Ash sat cross-legged and spoke since Joy was still petting him. "Don't worry Caterpie, maybe she will come around to like you." Caterpie nodded as he sadly said, "Okay." Joy may not have understood what the Pokemon said, but she has been trained to understand Pokemon to a good degree, so she could tell that he was feeling better. It was then that she looked at her watch and saw that it would be getting dark soon. "We should set up camp now. It will be getting dark in a couple of hours, so we should be ready." Ash looked up to see the sky still blue. "Aw, come on. It's still light out. We can still keep going." Joy got up and placed her hands on her hips as she gave him a stern look. "Ash, your mother has given me full authority over you. This is your journey, but I do have a task that I will see complete. Do you understand?" Misty was confused about what she was talking about. What task does she have that she would be so stern about? It shouldn't really be that bad if we continue on until it actually gets dark, she would have asked, but she saw that Ash submitted to her. Sure, she didn't know Ash all that well, but he seemed like the type that would argue something he didn't agree with no matter what. Ash sighed as he got up. "Alright. We'll set up camp for the night." Joy nodded. "Good. Now we need to set up a fire and get some water for dinner." She put down her pack and pulled out 2 collapsible fabric buckets. "Ash, can I ask you to go get some water?" Ash nodded as he put his backpack down, took the buckets, and looked at Caterpie. "Do you know where we can get some water?" Caterpie nodded. Yeah, I can lead you to a pond. He then crawled up Ash's body and plopped on top of his head. Hey, don't leave us behind. Pikachu ran to Ash and climbed up to his right shoulder, causing Ash to lean back with his arms flailing. Eevee felt like doing the same and ran behind before jumping to Ash's left shoulder, which was easier since he was leaning back. And the momentum of her jump pushed Ash to stabilize into an upright. Ash tumbled a bit as he was unprepared for the extra weights, but he was able to regain his footing when Eevee helped him. Once he was standing straight, he laughed at the 3 Pokemon on him. Great, let's go. He then began to make his way through the forest. Before he was out of earshot, Joy cupped her hands and called out to him, "Try not to get lost." Not getting a response, she sighed as she had been victim to his poor sense of direction. She then looked to Misty. "Mind helping me set up camp?" Misty sighed in relief now that Caterpie was no longer. She moved out from behind the tree and nodded, "Sure." The 2 females began to set up the campsite, with Misty gathering some firewood and Joy setting up 2 tents. The act that Joy had 2 tents surprised Misty since she did not expect the young nurse to be this prepared. It was then that Misty realized something. "Hey, I never asked your name. I know you are a nurse, Joy, but I don't think it would be good if I just called you that all the time." The pink-haired girl finished pitching up the first tent before she looked back to Misty and gave the nurse's normal smile. "Oh, I'm sorry. My first name is Aveline, Aveline Joy," she bowed as she introduced herself. "Ah, Lean." Misty nodded back to the now named Aveline. "Pleasure to now fully meet you, Aveline. I'm Misty Waterflower." Once Aveline heard the name, she gained a thinking pose. Waterflower. Isn't that the name of the FFFMMFF? She didn't get to finish her statement as Misty had covered her mouth in a panic. Misty bolted from where she was as she didn't want her to say it out loud. "Shush, please don't say it." She removed her hands when she gained a nod from the nurse and sighed in relief. Aveline tilted her head in innocent confusion. "Why don't you want me to say it out loud? There isn't anyone else here." Misty moved to the dried wood she got for the fire before she began to set them up. "I don't want anyone to know, plus I really don't want to be reminded of the gym." Aveline chose to drop the subject since it seemed to be a personal issue. Meanwhile, Ash was walking through the forest following the directions Caterpie gave him. "Hey, Ash." Ash looked to his left shoulder at Eevee. "Yeah." Eevee wanted to ask so many questions to him, but a lot of them were about how he was a Pokemon that she hasn't seen before. She wanted to ask, but she remembered that even he didn't know about it. "I want to ask, but we promised not to tell him." Her gaze shifted upwards to Caterpie, but also figured that she should discuss this with Pikachu. Looking at Ash, who was still looking at her, she asked, "Are we going to train today or are we going to do it tomorrow?" Ash thought about the question and remembered that if Aveline was saying that they should set up camp, then it meant that they wouldn't have much time for it. "I don't think we will have time today, so tomorrow I will train with you all." Pikachu looked at him as she was confused with why they wouldn't have time when they still had several hours until they would go to sleep. "What do you?" "We're here." The others looked to see that they made it to a small pond. Ash smiled as he moved over to the water's edge and began to fill up one of the buckets. He idly thought that the water was way too shallow, much to his disappointment. He paused when he heard some rustling in the bushes on the other side of the pond. Looking up, he saw a small blue Pokemon that had leaves on its head, walking out. "What Pokemon is that?" He pulled out his Pokédex and pointed it at it. "Oddish, the weed Pokemon. This Pokemon searches for rich soil to plant itself in the ground during the day. At night, it wanders around scattering its seeds to grow more plants. This Pokemon is female." Ash smiled as he put his Pokédex away. "Cool. Let's catch her." Pikachu gained a teasing smirk as she looked at him. "Another female to add to the team. Why, Ash, you stud." Ash's face went beet red as he became a stuttering mess as he tried to come up with something to say. I wasn't." Pikachu couldn't hold it in anymore as she fell off his shoulder laughing hard, kicking her feet as she held her stomach in pain at how hard she was laughing. "Oh, Arceus. Ha 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 ha, you should see the look on your face. Gasp, it hurts. Ha 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 ha, oh my Mew." That was hilarious. Eevee could not help but giggle as well at Ash's expense. Caterpie chuckled a bit as he was seeing that this team would be really fun to be with. Ash wanted to bury his head in his shirt but chose to just lower his hat to hide his face, but the blush was still visible. It was then he shook his head, almost tossing Caterpie off before he yelled to the Pikachu, "I am not doing that. Besides, she's a Pokemon, I'm a human." He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and nodded with a smile on his face as if he won this argument. Pikachu and Eevee smiled sadly at how wrong that statement was. And the worst part was that he didn't even know it was wrong. Pikachu ran up Ash's back and back onto his shoulder before in sync she and Eevee licked his cheek before rubbing their cheeks with his. "Sure you are." Caterpie tilted his head as he could tell that the way Pikachu said that made it seem that she was patronizing him. He shook his head before asking, "Are you going to catch the Oddish?" Ash looked up before he remembered the Oddish and looked to see that it was still here, drinking some water. Oh good, she hasn't left. He then looked at his 3 Pokemon and thought about who he should send. He then looked up Caterpie, "You wanna battle?" Caterpie bounced in excitement, "Sure." He hopped off his head and landed on the ground. Ash, although excited, waited for the Oddish to at least finish drinking. Once he saw her stop, he gestured for Caterpie. "Caterpie, let's start this off with string shot." Caterpie shot out a spray of sticky string at Oddish, who jumped in shock at the sudden attack. "Hey!" Oddish struggled in the silk before using its leaves to gain some more room. She then glared at Caterpie before glowing green and absorbing some of Caterpie's health. "Don't you know it's rude to attack someone when they're drinking? Even if they finished." Ash knew that Oddish was using Absorb, but he would not let it continue. "Caterpie. Don't let her continue. Use Tackle." Caterpie began to run towards Oddish despite his draining energy. Oddish dropped Absorb and tried to move out of the way, but due to string shot, she tripped before being tackled away, getting more wrapped up in webbing. Caterpie, seeing an opportunity, jumped on top of Oddish and bit down, causing a yelp of pain from her. Ash was surprised at this as he tried to think of what move Caterpie just used. Eevee, seeing his slight confusion, decided to answer him. "He's using Bug Bite. It's a bug move that could steal a berry if the other Pokemon has one." Ash didn't have much time to think about it since he saw Caterpie move off of Oddish to show that she was unconscious. He pulled out a Pokeball and threw it. "Pokeball, go." He watched as the ball made contact with Oddish before the Pokemon was absorbed inside. They all watched as the ball shook several times. Shimmy, 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 ping. Ash pumped his fist in the air. "All right." Eevee and Pikachu gripped onto his shoulders so they wouldn't fly off, and they got a feeling that they would have to get used to this. Caterpie jumped in the air and smiled at the win. Ash went and picked up the Pokeball and smiled. 2 Pokemon in one day. "I'm so lucky." He began to rub his cheek on the ball, which caused the 3 to chuckle at his antics. Once he was done, he moved over to Caterpie and patted him on the head. "That was awesome, Caterpie." "Thanks." Pikachu nodded in agreement. "He's right. You did well, and finishing it with Bug Bite was nice." Eevee smiled. "I didn't even know you knew Bug Bite. Glad you didn't use it on me. I hate being bit." Caterpie enjoyed the attention he was getting. Now he knew for sure that being with this team was a good thing. Suddenly he felt a tingle and he instinctively knew what it was. He moved back from Ash's hand before tilting his head upwards as he sprayed silk upwards. Ash pulled his hand back as he was surprised to see Caterpie do this. "Caterpie. What are you doing?" Both Eevee and Pikachu were now smiling wider at what he was doing, with Eevee whispering, "He's evolving." She was taping her front paws in excitement since being the evolution Pokemon, she knew how exciting it was to evolve. The silk that Caterpie was using soon enveloped him before glowing white, and then his shape changed before the glow faded and set out his new name, Metapod, which meant, "I've evolved." In a muffled, tired voice. Ash smiled as he picked up Metapod. "Way to go, Caterpie. I mean Metapod now." Metapod wiggled a bit as he used his eyes to smile and spoke tiredly, "Thanks, Ash." Ash could not help but laugh at this as he was just too happy at what had happened. Sometime later, Aveline was tapping her foot as she waited for Ash. Where is he? He was meant to just get water. It shouldn't take this long. She may have sounded a little irritated, she was actually worried. Misty came out of one of the tents, which she was surprised was a decent size that could fit 3 people. Both tents were this size, and she liked the idea that she wouldn't have to sleep outside in a forest that is known for bug Pokemon. She came out and looked over to the fire that had 2 separate pots over it, one larger than the other. She wondered what was in the second one, but she chose to ask later. Right now she chose to give her 2 cents on it. Maybe he ran into trouble. This caused her internal worry to escalate. What if she's right? Ash does have a bad habit of getting into some kind of trouble, and he doesn't have that much experience in Pokemon battles yet. She was about to go after Ash to make sure that he was alright, but just as she took a step, she saw the boy walking up to the camp. She sighed in relief before giving a stern look to him. Ash, what took you? Ash stopped in his tracks as he saw the look Aveline was giving him. Sorry it took me so long, but a lot happened. Pikachu and Eevee jumped off Ash's shoulder before running off to the fire as they smelled something tasty. Misty smiled at the 2 Pokemon as she was checking the food before she got up and walked towards the other 2. Define, a lot. Ash gained a wide smile as he handed over the 2 small buckets to Aveline. I caught another Pokemon. He grabbed a Pokeball off his belt and held it up. Misty grew nervous at this as she took several steps back as she robotically looked at him. Not another bug. Ash smiled as he thrusted the ball forward. Come on out. The ball opened up and a bright white light shot out. Misty, thinking it was another bug type, screeched in fear as she ran away to hide behind a tree a few yards away. Aveline looked at the new Pokemon forming, surprised that he had caught another one when they weren't looking. Once the light died down, Oddish appeared. Where am I? Aveline smiled. Aw, it's cute. She hung the 2 buckets on a small hook stand meant for hanging small objects before she moved to the Pokemon and brought up her hand as she began to rub the Pokemon on the side, which got a content sound from him. Misty peeked out from behind the tree to see what the Pokemon was, and to her relief, it wasn't a bug type. She sighed in relief as she walked back to the group and saw it was an Oddish. Oh, it's so cute. She ran closer and picked it up while looking it over. Ah, now I wish I was the one to go get water so I could have caught you. Ash grew smug. Well, too bad. I caught her with the help of Caterpie. It was then he remembered what else he wanted to show them. Oh yeah, check this out. He grabbed Metapod's ball before releasing said Pokemon. Misty was too preoccupied donning over Oddish to have heard him, but she did hear the release of another Pokemon. She turned her head and grew nervous at the sight of the Metapod. She was more tolerant of this kind of bug type since it didn't crawl all over the place. This didn't mean that she wasn't wary of it, as she did take 2 steps back. Aveline was surprised to see that Caterpie had evolved already. Sure, she knew that Metapods evolved quickly, but she had assumed that Caterpie would evolve tomorrow. Well done, Ash. It was then that she gained a more serious look. Now, we should get started. Ash's smile dropped as he knew what she was referring to. Aw, come on, Aveline. Do we have to? Misty was confused with what they were referring to, but the look on Aveline's face told the girl that this was a serious matter. Aveline crossed her arms and tapped her foot. Ash, you know that this is not something that will be argued. Now, clothes off. Ash and Misty immediately blushed at this, with the latter going full red while the former blushed in embarrassment. Ash then looked at Misty and spoke as if he gained a counter-argument. But I don't want to do this in front of Misty. His smile dropped as he saw that Aveline was not fazed by this. He slumped in defeat as he removed his hat before taking off his clothes. Misty was not sure what they were doing, but she covered her eyes and really hoped it wasn't indecent. Aveline smiled as she saw him now in just his boxers. She grabbed her own shirt before flinging off her clothes to reveal her in her Nurse Joy attire. Alright, Ash, please sit down so we can begin. They did the sudden wardrobe change in the show, so why not in here? Misty peeked through her fingers out of curiosity and then gained a confused look. Aveline, now as Nurse Joy, was crouched behind Ash, who was sitting on the ground and pressing her hands on his back. Now breathe for me. Ash complied as he took a deep breath. All the Pokemon gathered around the two in confusion, with Eevee asking, "What is she doing, Ash?" Ash was about to answer her, but he stopped himself as he saw Misty was still here, and he promised his mother that he wouldn't let anyone else know he could talk to Pokemon. Thankfully, Misty asked the very same question, but he wasn't the one who answered. As well as being Ash's friend, I am also his physician. Aveline answered as she began to move her hands to the right side of his torso. Misty gained a question mark over her head. Shouldn't that be done by a doctor? Why are you his physician? Ash chose to answer this as Nurse Joy lifted up his right arm and began to press on several spots. She has been trained to this for a while. Her mom used to do it, but then suddenly Aveline was taught in case she wasn't around. Oddish and Metapod looked to Eevee and Pikachu, with the former asking, "Why does she check him like that?" Eevee and Pikachu's ears drooped as they had an idea as to why, and they were proven right when Ash continued. Ash lowered his head as for some reason this always seemed to disturb him. He knows in his head that he had survived, but something just felt off about it. "Well, you see. Ash." Ash looked up at Nurse Joy to see a sad look in her eyes. "You don't have to tell her, you know." Ash nodded, but he didn't really see the harm in telling Misty. Especially since this was going to be a daily occurrence. "My mom wanted this done for me since I didn't make it when I was born." Misty, Metapod, and Oddish went wide-eyed as they understood the implications of this. "Mom told me that by some miracle I came back, and that Aveline's mother was there as well. It became something that they did constantly afterward. She would always give me a physical to make sure that everything was alright." Misty felt nervous asking this. "And are you?" Ash nodded as Nurse Joy moved over to his left side and began running her hands on it while feeling for any irregularities. "Yeah. They are just overprotective." Nurse Joy poked his cheek as she spoke, and with good reason. She then got back to her task, but when she got to the side of his stomach, Ash tried to hold in his laughter as he was ticklish. Misty was still confused about one thing, but why a Nurse Joy? "I'm sure a human doctor would be better suited. Not to sound rude, but I always thought Nurse Joys worked mainly on Pokemon." Nurse Joy did not externally show it, but she was nervous about the question. She didn't know how to answer the inquiry, but she was saved by Ash. "It's always been this way, and they've done well, I think. And Mom doesn't like the idea of me going to the hospital. Says it brings up bad memories." Misty felt like this conversation was getting more negative the longer it went, so she chose to drop it there. Nurse Joy moved to his legs and began to feel the muscles there. "Okay, so far it all seems to be in order. Muscles are strong and his sense of touch is just as it normally is. He still has those slightly disjointed thumbs, but it isn't anything major or noticeable. His index and middle finger still move in conjunction with each other, as well as his pinky and ring finger. Now for the legs." She checked off the slight irregularities that he had, but she assumed it was because of his normal body structure. The fingers were more than likely because his normal Pokemon body only had 3 fingers, and his thumb, which she assumed to be one of the fingers, had slightly more movability than normal humans. She moved to his legs and moved them to check the joints. Unlike most Nurse Joys that usually only focus on Pokemon anatomy, she and her mother studied human biology, specifically for Ash. Joints are still good and his leg muscles are as strong as ever. Another thing that they discovered was that Ash had more stamina than a normal boy his age would. Not only that, but he was tougher as well, able to take on Pokemon attacks much easier than humans would. As this was going on, Oddish and Metapod were talking with Eevee and Pikachu. So is what he said true? Oddish may be the newest member of the team, but to hear that someone didn't survive birth was unsettling to hear no matter what. Pikachu looked over at Ash, who was trying his hardest not to laugh at Nurse Joy rubbing his feet. She felt like she would have to do this every time a new member joined the team. She and most likely Eevee would have to tell each Pokemon Ash caught about keeping this secret. Why did we have to get such an interesting trainer? She then looked to the two newcomers before saying, "Tonight when Ash is asleep, we have something to tell you." Evie immediately knew that they would have to explain everything and she was fine with that. Oddish and Metapod accepted this as they would be getting some answers soon. Aveline finished physically checking on him and pulled out a stethoscope. She pressed it on his chest and heard the irregular heartbeat. Well, irregular if he was human, but for a Pokemon, it was almost standard with a few differences. Ash felt uneasy when she pressed the metal part on his chest. He was once terrified of it for some reason, but he didn't know why, since it was a silly thing to be afraid of. He had gotten much better at dealing with it, but no matter what, having a metal circular thing attached to him felt familiar and not in a good way. He still didn't know why. Once she finished with that, she nodded. "All right. That's it for the day. Now it's time to eat." Ash jumped to his feet and was about to run to the food, but was stopped when he saw Nurse Joy's stern look as she pointed to his pile of clothes. Rubbing his head in embarrassment, he quickly got dressed. Nurse Joy moved to the food and grabbed the second pot that was over the fire before she grabbed one of the plates that was set aside for it. It looked like a beef stew, but unbeknownst to Ash or Misty, it was actually made of things meant for Pokemon. She was not a breeder, so it may not have been the best thing made for Pokemon, but it was the best she could do. The ingredients were what were used for poke blocks and poke food, with some specific berries to give it a better flavor. They were supposed to help with a Pokemon's health and coat. They gave enough of this to Ash that they could have entered him in a beauty contest in Hoenn and he would probably win. She giggled at the thought of dressing Ash up as a show Pokemon and his reaction to it. There was meat in there to finish the appearance of beef stew, and the excuse as to why it is so different was because they wanted to maintain Ash's diet. He didn't really complain since he enjoyed the flavor. Nurse Joy went to give everyone food and explained to Misty what the other pot was for, which she accepted, especially after hearing that story. Though Misty couldn't help but think that Ash seemed fine enough to not need special attention with the way he inhaled the food. They all enjoyed their meal as the sun began to go down, which meant that it was time for them to get some sleep, and they got into their sleepwear. Ash got out of his tent in order to grab his Pokeballs, which he left on a tree stump. Misty and Aveline were putting out the fire and they turned their heads when she heard Ash come out of the tent. Misty sweet dropped at the sight of the oversized PJs he was wearing. "What's with the clothes?" Ash smiled embarrassingly as he rubbed the back of his head. He was glad that Misty didn't laugh at him for it, since one time Gary saw him in it and laughed at him. "I'm more comfortable wearing these." He moved and picked up the Pokeballs for Metapod and Oddish. Misty shrugged, since she figured that it didn't really matter. Everyone sleeps in a way that is most comfortable for them. Ash was about to return Metapod, but Pikachu and Eevee got in the way as they called out to him. "Wait, Ash. Don't return them." Ash tilted his head as he lowered his hand. "Ha! Why?" Pikachu and Eevee then picked up Metapod, with Pikachu holding up the upper half with her paws while Eevee used her head to hold up the lower half. As Pikachu said, "We have stuff to talk about." They then began to carry Metapod towards the tent, with Oddish following behind. Metapod was unprepared to be carried, but once he was out of his shock, he couldn't help but say, "We." Ash laughed at how tired Metapod's excitement sounded and made his way into the tent. Misty and Aveline finished cleaning up the outside before they began to make their way to their tents, but Misty paused as she saw Aveline not going towards the tent she was going to, but into Ash's. "What are you doing?" Aveline turned to Misty and smiled. "He is a very restless sleeper." "I am not." Aveline ignored Ash's yell from the tent. "And I have to make sure he doesn't hurt himself." Misty sighed as Ash seemed to be doted on by the people he knew, and it wasn't her place to question it. "All right then. Good night, you two." Ash popped his head out of the tent. "Night, Misty." All the Pokemon inside the tent called out, saying good night in their language. Aveline smiled as she nodded to Misty. "Good night. Sweet dreams." Misty smiled back as she went into her tent, mentally thanking Aveline for bringing this tent so she wouldn't have to deal with any bugs. Once Misty was in her tent, Ash glared at Aveline. "I am not a restless sleeper." Aveline poked his forehead and pushed it back into the tent. "Yes, you are. Now off to bed, she walked into the tent and saw Ash laying on a mat instead of a sleeping bag. Make sure to sleep on your stomach, Ash. Ash grumbled as he flipped over so he was on his stomach now. This is my journey. Why do I have to still do these things? Aveline laid out her sleeping bag next to him with a 2ft separation. It is your journey, but your health is my concern. I will make sure that you continue the rules that I'm sure your mother told you about. Ash only grumbled about this. He turned his head to see his Pokemon standing there staring at him. Aren't you guys going to get some sleep? Eevee smiled as she nodded. Yes, but there is something we have to do first. You get some sleep. We will join afterward. Ash blinked for a second before he shrugged as he yawned and buried his head on his pillow. Aveline sat on her knees as she waited for a minute until Ash would fall asleep. After his breathing evened out and he was then enveloped in bright light. There we go. The first thing she did was lower his loose pants to let his tail freely pop out, and she began her examination, starting with his tail. Fur is still soft with no shedding. Tail muscles still need stimulation due to lack of use. She began to massage the tail since he has never used it other than small flicks in his sleep. Ash let out several mewls as he felt the message on his tail, which caused him to move his tail but not out of Aveline's grasp. Aveline continued to check his body while also taking notes on what she had. She had to do this since her mother and she needed to know as much as they could to understand how best to care for him. She was just really glad that Ash was a very heavy sleeper. As Aveline was doing this, Oddish and Metapod were staring wide-eyed at what Ash became. Metapod was stunned silent, but Oddish had a bit more to say. Wah, how, Pikachu and Eevee smiled at their stunned reactions. Eevee took a step to stand in front of the two. This is what we wanted to tell you. Ash isn't human. Oddish shook her head a bit to get out of her shock. He's a Pokemon. Pikachu covered her mouth. Shish. You don't want to wake him up. He is able to understand us. I don't think you had the chance to talk to him, but we don't want to wake him up. Oddish nodded as Pikachu removed her paws. Metapod got out of his shock as he had to ask, what is he though? I have never heard of a Pokemon like this. Pikachu sighed as she took a step closer to Ash, who was now having his horns checked. He is a Mewtwo. Both Metapod and Oddish repeated the name in unison, Mew.2. Eevee moved to sit next to Pikachu. He is a clone of Mew. Oddish was the one that began to panic at this but kept her voice down as to not wake him up. Then shouldn't we be bowing to him or something? To be related to Mew. We need to show him our respect. Pikachu and Eevee looked at Oddish and Metapod and they could see the latter agreed with the former, and Eevee was the one to answer, no. We shouldn't, because he doesn't even know what he is. It was then that she and Pikachu recounted what they were told by Chansey. Oddish and Metapod listened intently to the story and they were stunned to hear the full story about what Ash said earlier. It was by the end that the two had nothing else to say. What could they say? But it was the question that came from Pikachu that snapped them out of it. So will you help us keep this secret from him and still be part of his team? Metapod didn't take long to answer as he owed Ash for helping him evolve. Okay. Oddish looked to Ash. Mewtwo, whichever, before she sighed. Okay. He caught me anyway and I'll help him. This should be an interesting trip with what could be considered a legendary and related more to the first ever Pokemon. Eevee and Pikachu smiled at this as they felt a bit of concern. They didn't know they had being lifted. They turned back to Ash to see Aveline finish her examination and wrote down something on a piece of paper. Seeing this, they decided that they should get some sleep as well. Oddish went to her Pokeball before entering it for some rest. Metapod asked for Eevee to press the button for his ball for him to sleep. Eevee and Pikachu then moved to sleep next to Ash and were surprised when he wrapped them in a hug and curled around them, bringing his tail to complete the curl. The two smaller Pokemon got out of their shock as they got comfortable before getting some sleep. Next morning, everyone had gotten up and had finished eating breakfast together, with Ash eating his specially made meal. They all ate together with the Pokemon eating their food just a bit away from the humans and Misty sitting on the far side of the group away from the Pokemon since Ash let Metapod out to hang out with the other Pokemon. Aveline even let out Chansey to join them. It was then that a bird Pokemon came swooping down to land not that far from the group. Ash saw the Pokemon and got excited as he grabbed his hat and put it on his head. Wow, Pidgeotto. He pulled out his Pokédex and pointed it at the Pokemon. Pidgeotto, the evolved form of Pidgey. This Pokemon is armed with sharp claws that they use when diving down at their prey. Unlike the gentle Pidgey, Pidgeotto can be aggressive, so use extreme caution. Ash put the Pokédex in his pants pocket as he thought about the Pokemon type. Okay, Pidgeotto is a flying type, so electric should work. He looked to Pikachu. Mind helping me out? Pikachu finished chewing what she had in her mouth before she nodded and moved over to stand in front of Ash. I'm ready. Pidgeotto was in the middle of eating a worm for breakfast before he noticed the trainer and the Pikachu. A morning battle. Okay. He finished swallowing the worm and flapped his wings to float a few feet in the air. Ash stood ready as he gave his order. Pikachu, start this off with a Thundershock. Pikachu charged up her electricity and sent it out at the bird Pokemon, but said Flyer flew higher to dodge it. Pidgeotto gained altitude before diving at the mouse Pokemon with wing attack. Pikachu, duck under and try again. Pikachu dropped to the ground and flattened herself to the ground and was able to avoid the attack before she turned around and sent another shock at Pidgeotto. Pidgeotto flew higher to regain some maneuverability, but he was stopped short in the air as he felt electricity all throughout his body. Ash pulled out a Pokeball before aiming and throwing it. He watched the ball absorb the bird type before dropping to the ground. He watched the ball closely as he waited to see the result. Shimmy, 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 ping. Ash smiled as he jumped into the air in cheer with Pikachu joining in on it. Welcome to the team. Misty sighed as she asked no one in particular, is this going to be a thing with him? Everyone there nodded. Ash picked up his Pokeball before petting Pikachu. Thanks again, Pikachu. You're welcome. Ha 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 ha, quite a shocking performance. Everyone got up from where they were and looked towards where the new voice came from. Ash tilted his head in confusion. I know that voice. Insert Team Rocket motto. Ash sweat dropped halfway through the whole thing. No, not this again. He waited for them to finish before he spoke to them. We're kind of busy. Jessie smirked at the boy. Quiet boy, we aren't here to listen to you. We're here to get your Pokemon. James pulled out a rose before pointing it at Pikachu. Hand over that Pikachu. Ash indignantly crossed his arms. This is my Pikachu. Go get your own. Jessie scoffed at this. The only Pikachu we want is that one. We are out to take rare and valuable Pokemon, and that Pikachu fits the bill. Meowth grew a tick mark before jumping up and scratching their faces. Stop talking. You're giving away all our secrets. Ash looked to his right as Aveline and Misty walked up to him. Is my Pikachu really that special? Pikachu crossed her paws as she glared at Ash. Hey, are you saying I'm not? Meowth jumped down from scratching the two he was with as he crossed his arms. Your Pikachu's powers were incredibly impressive. Its power exceeds its evolutionary level. AARGH. Pikachu just sent out a shock towards Meowth as she glared at him. I'm a female. Don't call me an it. Misty remembered how powerful the Thundershock was back at the Pokemon Center. You know he is right. Pikachu's electricity was powerful. Ash suddenly looked to Misty wide-eyed. Wait, you understood Meowth. He was suddenly pulled to the side by Aveline as she began to whisper in his ear. Ash, this Meowth is speaking like a person. We can all understand him. Ash looked to her in shock. Wait, what? Really? Jessie grew fed up with all this talk and pulled out her Pokeball. Enough of this. If you won't hand it over, then we'll just take it. Ekans, go. James pulled out his and sent out his Pokemon. Coughing, go get them. Ekans and Coughing burst from their Pokeball ready for battle. Ash tilted his head as he saw this. Hey, wait. Aren't double battles only legal in Hone? James flipped his hair at this. Why should we care if it's legal here? We're Team Rocket. We make our own rules. Ash, despite feeling trepidation at the name, shook it off as he looked to his Pokemon. Who wants to battle? Eevee bounded forward as she was eager for a challenge. Aveline walked up and pulled out a Pokeball. Mind if I join you? Ash excitedly nodded as he looked at the ball in her hand. Who are you going to send out? She smiled as she tossed it out. Let's go. Dratini. Out of the Pokeball came a Dratini, came out and landed next to Eevee. Ready for battle. Ash smiled as he waved to the small dragon type. Hey, Dratini. Dratini looked back and smiled at the sight of an old friend. Hey Ash. Good to see you again. Jessie grew tired of this as she started things off. Enough of this. Ekans, attack that little brown pest. Coughing tackled Dratini. Both poison types attacked the other two Pokemon only to miss as they were dodged. Aveline looked to Dratini, counter it with Dragon Tail. Ash followed up with his own command, Eevee. Double kick. Dratini's tail glowed blue before swinging it at Coughing, sending it flying back towards James. Eevee's hind legs began to glow before kicking Ekans in the face before spinning around and sending another kick in its body and sending it flying in the same manner as Coughing. James and Jessie watched as their Pokemon was sent flying over their heads. James even dropped his rose beaten so easily. Jessie glared back at the group of trainers. Now that bugs me. Meowth jumped forward and unsheathed his claws. Now let a real Pokemon handle this. Aveline didn't give him the chance to do anything. Dratini. Twister. Dratini's tail now glowed white before she swung it in the air, which created a small tornado of wind that swept up Meowth, who screamed. The Twister then swept up Jessie, James, and their Pokemon and began to drag them away, with the team screaming out. Team Rockets blasting off again. The group smiled as they watched the crooks fly away, and they all cheered now that they were done with them. Ash smiled as he picked Eevee up and spun her around as he laughed. Way to go, Eevee. Eevee smiled as she cheered in his grasp. Pikachu smiled as she and the rest of the Pokemon walked up to them. Glad to see that rude Meowth fly out of here. HMPH, calling me and it. Ash smiled as he put Eevee down before petting Pikachu. We all know you're a girl, Pikachu. Just forget about him. It was then that Dratini came up to them and spoke. It's good to see you are still the same. Ash, the dragon type, spoke in a female voice, registering it as a female. Aveline walked up and indeed at the boy. You did very well in that battle. You are just starting, but you'll improve. Misty came up next to her. Well, for a beginner you aren't bad. We'll see if you become anything close to a Pokemon master. Ash stood up and gave a determined look. I'll show you I can.
Hey guys, if you like this video, please do one thing, like it, share it with your those friends who love to watch Pokemon or any fanfic of anime which are related to specific genres. So please do that and turn on the bell icon for notification of these any other series which are still ongoing on channel. Thanks for watching.